favorite was that it spread COVID. So the radio antennas actually are capable of spreading a biological. A CNBC, again, you'll appreciate this, a CNBC reporter anchor actually asked our CEO on live television 5G was the COVID virus. That's very sad that cable news has.
Well, thank you all very much for attending the Murphy Series Distinguished Lectures, and we are really excited today that we have Julie Smith, who's Vice President of Relations. We're going to actually have Julie walk us through her journey to where she is. So I'm not going to be excited about it, but she's been in politics and communications since she graduated from the University of Georgia.
Even before.
Sorry.
And we have a live audience that is very engaged. So thank you for being here. So Julie, our first question to get this conversation started is, tell us about your journey to Verizon.
Well, I'm so excited to be on campus on such a pretty day. So thank y'all so much for having me at West Georgia. So where it started really for me was my internship at the state capitol. And so that's why I said even before I graduated, because I feel like for me, my internship in the Georgia General Assembly was sort of the kickoff point for my career. It helped me just gain some skill sets, knowledge while I was a political science major at Georgia. But then also the relationships that I built, which led to me moving to Washington, D.C. to work for Congressman Bob Barr the day after I graduated from Georgia. So literally took off my cap and gown, packed the moving truck and moved to Washington. Spent 3 years working in Congress for Bob Barr, and then got promoted to move to Congressman Nathan Deal's office, where I was a legislative assistant working on a number of issues for him, which was a ton of fun and really learned a lot. Then moved back to Georgia with one goal, which was to work for Sonny Perdue, who was running for governor of Georgia. So I worked on his campaign, helped him beat the incumbent Roy Barnes in the largest upset in gubernatorial politics in the country that year in 2002, and then worked for Governor Perdue for 4 years. Then got this crazy opportunity and was recruited actually to move to New York City and work at Fox News. And so I helped them launch a morning show called The Morning Show with Mike and Juliet, and candidly decided very quickly that working in television was not something I wanted to do. I'd rather watch TV than produce it. And we can talk more about that, about my experience at Fox, but a great experience working in live TV. There's nothing else like it. It's the most intense environment I've ever worked in. But decided that wasn't for me, and moved back to Georgia in 2007 without a job. All roads always for me lead back to Georgia. And so I moved back to Georgia in 2007 without a job, but Verizon was hiring. And so they hired me for a position doing external and government affairs. And that was in 2007. And I've been with them ever since, been promoted since. My responsibilities have changed over the years, but that's kind of my career path. And since Verizon, I've also lived in Tampa. So throughout my career journey, I've lived in Washington, D.C., New York City, Atlanta, Tampa, and now back in Georgia.
So before we really talk about your role at Verizon, let's kind of start back where you're talking about Fox News.
Yeah.
Tell us about that. What was your job like at Fox News?
Yeah.
And building of a morning show? What skills did you have to have?
Oh my gosh.
That
Yeah.
To help you.
Yeah. So I had never worked in television and really never worked in communications. But my background of working in intense environments in politics and working for a governor, working in Congress, they felt like I had the right skill set to be the audience producer for this new morning show. They really wanted to give the audience elements, including recruiting the audience, to somebody that they just felt like could manage it themselves without needing a lot of help and supervision. Fox at the time did not have any kind of morning show. The show was going up against, at the time, Regis and Kelly, which is now Kelly and Ryan, which I think Ryan's leaving. But at the time, it was Regis and Kelly, and then the third hour of the Today Show. So Fox was launching this show to air on all the Fox-owned stations around the country, like Fox 5 Atlanta, to go up against them. And so they had an audience. And so that's what I was responsible for. Now, what I have to say, honestly, not to discourage any students from pursuing television, but it's, I think, a really important thing to know is it is one of the most intense environments I've ever operated in. And you get up at it wasn't even the crack of dawn. I was waking up at 4:30 in the morning to go be at the studio by 6. And you have the most intense experience. And no matter what's going on at 9:00 a.m., the stage manager is going to count down from 5 and you're on air no matter what's happening. And so from about 6 a.m. to 10:30 a.m. every single day was the most intense environment I've ever lived through in my life. And then you get to wake up the next morning and do it all over again. And so it was like this reward of, okay, we did this great thing, but then you don't even have a chance to really take a breath because you have to do it all over again. And so for me, because I didn't aspire to be in television and didn't really want to pursue a career, it just felt like Groundhog Day. And so very quickly for me, I realized this is really not what I want to do with my life. But I was surrounded by people who have gone on to do incredible things because they were willing to work hard and get it done at that show. But I will say, 2 years into the show, right around the time Verizon promoted me to a new role, the show got canceled. So I feel like ultimately I did make the right decision for my career.
So let's now kind of shift to talk about Verizon. So what does your role at Verizon really mean day to day? What does it look like in your work? And then also, just to let the audience know, Julie's here speaking in her personal capacity. She's not representing Verizon here today.
Yeah.
Get advice to our students, others on campus about where to move forward. So tell us about day to day at Verizon. Yeah,
that's important because in my personal capacity, depending on the questions Karen asked me, it might be that I answer it in a certain way that is really reflective of who I am and not necessarily the company. But so my role day to day is I do local government and community affairs for Verizon. And so I'm responsible for all of our government relations with local governments across a multitude of states. In fact, actually just expanded my territory. So now my territory is across the Southeast all the way over to Arizona. So I have Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, Arkansas, Oklahoma. So huge swath of territory. I have 6 people that report to me. And really our job is to help the network team deploy the network. So we are often in the public right of way, laying fiber and small cells and infrastructure. Macro towers require, all of these infrastructure that we have require significant government approvals. We spend a lot of time wading through that bureaucracy. Where we get involved and where me and my team get involved is if something's not going right and needs to be escalated. So like I'm the problem fixer. So I work very closely with our network engineers, and it's very incredibly rewarding work because I'm actually helping them deploy the network, which we really view as critical infrastructure for the United States. You know, when you think about how reliant you are on your mobile devices and all of your communications, your broadband, that's what we're enabling. And I view that as so important. So for me, I mean, you know, it's a huge company, but in terms of what I get to work on a day-to-day basis, it's really fun. And when I'm in talking to mayors and talking to city council members or county commissioners, I'm able to talk about the fact that we're making a significant economic development investment, a capital investment in their community for this critical infrastructure. And so one of my colleagues calls it, we're on the side of the angels. I love that saying because I'm not in there saying, you know, can we put, you know, some random piece of equipment in, you know, every school or, you know, whatever. I'm in there saying, we're here to make sure that your technology works in a reliable way, whether it's on a day-to-day basis or during a crisis. So those are some of the things that I focus on. And so traveling across my territory, meeting with government officials. And then on the really fun side of my job is doing the community affairs. And so getting to support organizations across the footprint of my territory with, you know, philanthropic grants, investments in their organizations, joining chambers of commerce, and really investing in the communities that we serve and really getting to decide who Verizon's going to invest in the community and in my territory, which is incredibly rewarding work.
So when others need to apply for grants, you get to read all those applications, decide what affects the mission, and then you can affect.
Yeah, but really we do it on an invitation only. So we're deciding up front who we potentially want to support. And so then we ask them to apply. So yeah.
So we entitled this conversation, Intersecting Communications and Politics.
Yeah.
So thinking about that, you've told us your day to day. How does that really work? Because you studied political science undergraduate, so you became very well versed in the political side. How did you then have to learn the communications technology side to bridge those together?
Oh my goodness. So when you think about from a technology perspective, I spend a lot of time with our engineers, and a lot of times what they're talking to me about makes no sense. And then other times they'll take the time to explain it and speak in layman's terms, and it does make sense to me. And it is a tangible network. I was really bad at math. I was really bad at calculus, algebra, all those things. But when I think about the network that we're deploying, it's very tangible. So I can point to the antenna and understand that that's connected to fiber and connected to power and all those things. And so I've spent a lot of time learning and really digging in with the engineers. And so that's been, a really fun part of the job. And then just from a communications perspective, I think even, when I think about over the course of time of just the different jobs I've had and the ability to just talking about the ability to communicate, but just building relationships. And, I can remember when I was on the congressional side and even in the governor's office, getting lobbied and, folks coming to me to lobby. And so learning from them how they went about doing that and were effective, not knowing that I would ever be on this side. But learning from them on how they did it and sort of picking up those tactics along the way. So yeah.
So we in the Murphy Center focus a lot on public service.
Mm.
And leadership. So I'm going to ask you, what are some current challenges you are facing as a leader right now?
Yeah. So from my perspective, even though it's talking about my company, but just from a personal perspective, we are going through a lot of changes, first of all, just in corporate America in general, but certainly at Verizon. And it's a highly, highly competitive industry. We are, years ago, you were competing for somebody to become, buy a cell phone. Now it's, okay, well, don't you need an iPad to connect and all those things? And so now we're sort of fighting for customers from each other, especially on the enterprise and business side of the house. And so for us, I think the challenge right now is making sure that I am positioning Verizon as the leader in the industry that we are, and continuing to, candidly, we're number one from a root metrics perspective, from a number of customers perspective, those sorts of things. And so my job is to really help us maintain that. And so in the role that I play, we all play that role, whatever position you're in the company. And so for me, I think the challenges are making sure that I'm delivering results for the business and what I'm responsible for and meeting my objectives. And then I have 6 people who report to me who are all fairly new to the company. We have quite a few who joined right before COVID. And so I've never even met them in person because they're on the other side of the country. And so really trying to build relationships and trusting relationships with my team is something that I'm trying to spend a lot of time on, while also solving and issues that the business needs from a network perspective. So it's that human of building the environment and my relationships with my team, while also realizing we've got a job to do. And, I want to get to know you and I want to build this relationship and I want you to feel supported. But at the end of the day, we've got objectives we've got to meet. So those are kind of the challenges and things that I'm balancing, especially trying to do that without being in person all the time.
On the public service side, because you engage with mayors and the local elected officials very often. So can you talk about when you were involved in the political space, what you learned from that, people you worked with, how that's kind of transferred over to your interactions today, and then maybe for our audience, explain what you think public service is and how that's
Well, I'll say this. I say this often to the folks I meet with. I think local government's the hardest, because when you go meet with a member of Congress, they've got a huge staff, and oftentimes you're meeting with the staff. Same with a governor, they have a staff. Whereas when you go in to meet with a mayor or a city council member or county commissioner, they might have an assistant, and sometimes it's an assistant they share amongst all of them. And so when you're talking to them about an issue, it's really on them to know the issue. Now they have county staff and city staff, of course, every county and municipality, but in terms of their own personal sort of staff support of keeping up with things, that's on them. And so I try to recognize that and acknowledge that really one of my main working with senior leaders at the state and local level is to help educate them. They don't know about our business. They don't know what we have to do to make sure. Most of them have no idea what it takes to make a cell phone work. And I certainly didn't before I started working in the industry. And so my job really is to educate them about why this infrastructure is important, the role that they play in approving it, and and those sorts of things. So back to sort of public service, running for Congress gets so much attention, running for governor gets so much attention, running for United States Senate gets so much attention, running for president, but running for school board, running for county commission, those are the folks that affect our lives on a very much a day-to-day basis. And we need good people to serve in those capacities. That's one thing I worry about, is continuing to get good people who are willing to serve. That's so important, I think, for the preservation of our republic. And it's hard work. You're constantly taking daggers, with the environment we are in, with, social media and all those things. I can see where people just kind of say, this isn't worth it anymore. I don't want to do it. We were joking earlier about protesters. But, you do one wrong thing as a school board member and, from here on out, you're going to have protesters coming and screaming at you at every school board meeting. That takes a lot of courage to sort of withstand that. And so, I just really admire people that are willing to serve at all levels. But specifically at the local government level, I view that as particularly challenging, and it requires a lot of dedication. Because you run into your constituents in the grocery store.
That's very true. I want to kind of ask you, you have a sheet right there. I'm hoping that has some notes on it to tell us about your favorite experiences or stories. Something that's kind of lighthearted you can share.
Yeah.
Intersecting of kind of communication.
Yeah, one thing I did get to work on a few years ago in my role at Verizon, which was very helpful for my prior roles, is we were first starting to deploy 5G and really deploy so much more infrastructure and network assets in and around the country. My CEO at the time, Lowell McAdam, decided he wanted to go meet with a bunch of mayors in some of our big cities. And so even though I only covered at the time the Southeast, my leadership made me responsible for that project throughout the country. And so I was responsible for planning and executing meetings for the Verizon CEO to meet with some of the largest mayors across the country. And so I got to sit in on a few of those. And one in particular was the mayor of Miami. And I know we had talked earlier about, the fact that it's Women's History Month. I was the only female in the room. So I was there with my CEO, the Verizon CEO, we're, I think, certainly a Fortune 20 company, one of the largest corporations in the country, much less the world. Here's the CEO of that company, our general counsel, who's my big boss, and then the mayor and a few of his staffers, and I'm the only female. And what I loved is my CEO pulled me in, had me sitting right next to him, and had me just as much a part of the meeting and talking just as much as he did with the mayor. And so that was pretty cool. I mean, I'm pretty high up in the company, but certainly don't get to interact with my CEO very much. And he's since retired. We have a new CEO. But for me, from a just career perspective, the fact that they gave me that opportunity internally and then was able to execute on it and have these meetings with the CEO was sort of like this little girl from Conyers. I grew up in Conyers, like this little girl from Conyers who didn't do very well in school. I was sort of sitting there going, okay, I've done all right. So that was kind of a neat story. And then when I worked for Governor Perdue, I got to plan a lot of his events in the public. And Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s while Governor Perdue was in office. And so I got to help the governor and really this plan the state honoring the King family. Unfortunately, when Dr. King was assassinated, the state really did not do anything, especially to the level that they should have really honored him at the time and the King family. This was really an opportunity for the state to do something that was long overdue and pay their respects to her and certainly her husband. And so he stayed in the state capitol, and I was instrumental and involved in all that on the governor's behalf. And for me, I think career-wise, that was probably one of the neatest things that I've ever gotten to be involved in. So yeah, I was in DC on 9/11. That's a really long story, but gives me a perspective that's somewhat different than folks that might have been somewhere else in the country that day, of just being in the Capitol complex during the attack. And so I'm thankful I was there. I'm thankful for Flight 93, but kind of a surreal experience. People have told me, well, you should write it down, which I have. I remember like it was yesterday. So those are kind of some, highlights, lowlights of just my career and just kind of getting to experience. And then in explained to somebody, I said, oh, we're going to have a come to Jesus meeting. And the New Yorkers didn't know what that meant. I'm like, I don't even know how to explain what come to Jesus means if you don't know what it means. So that was come to Jesus we had actually with Roger Ailes. So a few meetings with interesting this is my father's mother's mother. She was a telephone operator for so I guess it was Southern Bell in the 20s. And by today, we don't have telephone. Hard to even compare. I am minimally 5 levels above what my great grandmother was at the time. And the fact that both my grandmothers and my great grandmothers worked. And I think for me, especially my, great grandmother who was a telephone operator, if somebody had whispered in her ear and said, hey, your great granddaughter who's going to be named for you is going to be about 5 levels above you in this company 100 years from now, she couldn't have even fathomed that, because women were not in those roles, not by any stretch. And so I think that is incredible, something I don't take for granted. And it's based on community.
And would you encourage them to get involved in public service?
Gosh, yeah. thought that. If I had to predict that and tried to my missed out on so many incredible things. For me, it's, hard work, show up, internship, be the bosses can count on, be reliable, to do whatever's no effect. It was that first to get no, because you're good at that. West Georgia, for the opportunities that are those extracurricular chances to get to build relationships.
Thank you so much for your time and speaking with us. Does anyone in the audience have a question?
So you know about infrastructure being vital. The United States, obviously, digital infrastructure. What's interesting though is that private-public partnership. So a state like Georgia said, we're going to take this chunk of COVID money and invest it in infrastructure. What does that private-public partnership look like?
Yeah. So again, just being careful what I say here on Verizon's behalf, but I think the goal is, I believe, again, I don't work for government, but the goal was to get broadband to every corner of the United States. And the more rural you get in the United States, and I don't even think about Georgia when I think about rural. I mean, I've driven through stretches of road in Wyoming where you literally pass what appears to be a human structure of some kind every 15 miles or 20 miles. That's rural. And when you think about the cost of a company that deploys broadband, a for-profit entity, the cost of doing business to serve one customer, the return to serve that one customer is going to take years of that customer paying their bill. To government was trying to do is provide broadband underserved areas, which absolutely. But when you think about the middle of the United States, I mean, that is middle of nowhere. And so I think is the goal with the incentive of trying to get companies, whether it's electric utilities or broadband companies, to apply for that funding. Because what is important about how this money is spent, and something that certainly I think academics need to look at and study, is how effective government is at being able to deploy that broadband. Because there's only a few. And so the electric utilities are getting into that business, but making sure it's a cost-effective way is, I think, really important. But I think that's where it kind of is like government holding to account when they're spending that money to deploy the infrastructure, making sure that the company that has applied for that money or the entity that's applied for that money is doing what they said they would do, and meeting that last right, and the oversight piece, and meeting that, really truly meeting that under helps.
So networking is often a nebulous concept to students, right?
Yeah.
People say it's about who.
Yeah.
It's about who. So how did you two meet? How does that relationship get sustained? And do you have advice to students about the process of networking?
Yeah.
I think when you're young, it doesn't really make sense how these things happen.
Yeah.
It's often serendipitous. So what's your origin story?
It's funny that you asked that question, and I love it, because for me, it's about authenticity and really building authentic relationships. And certainly when you have those internships and opportunities to, say, be in the General Assembly, and meet other, state legislators who then recommend you for that first job in Washington, which is exactly what happened for me. It's about the authenticity of just building those relationships. And what's funny about that is when I think about Dr. Owen and how she and I know each other, which is through mutual connections at the University of Georgia, Chris Carr, our Attorney General for the state, he and I met on Johnny Isaacson's campaign when he was running for Congress in, what year was that? 99? Yeah, 99. He and I became friends because I was volunteering. I was still in college. He was in law school. He was volunteering. We became friends. We have sustained that friendship throughout both of our career. And lo and behold, now he's the Attorney General of the state. And I haven't even had to lobby him on Verizon's behalf. We're literally just friends, which is great. But what's funny is I have friends who have been truly my friends who are now mayors of cities in the state. There's a guy I knew in Washington who's now a state legislator, a very powerful state legislator in Alabama. And so it's fun when you get to watch the careers of your friends and end up seeing where they go. And so for me, it's also, you never know where somebody might end up. And so not making enemies, because somebody that's a nobody today probably isn't going to be a nobody tomorrow. And it's funny when I think about my first job in DC was staff assistant, answering the phones, opening the mail, and giving Capitol tours. And there are people that I still know now who treated me with dignity and respect, even though I was that, frontline office worker, nobody, who treated me like a VIP, who I'm still connected to and have maybe gotten opportunities to get support from Verizon over the years because we've maintained, that relationship. And so to me, the biggest takeaway is just authentically building relationships and not making any enemies.
So Julie and I met through a mutual friend. We did not attend UG at the same time. We were maybe close.
Yeah.
And then the part about staying it is the intentionality.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't need anything from Julie. I wanted to be friends with Julie because we have common interests, and therefore it's been intentional to just have lunch with Julie. And so building that, it's a network and a friendship. It's really a friendship, and she's part of people that I know. And then she's connected me to others, and I think I would do the same for her. If she needed to know someone, I would work with her as well. Yeah. And thinking about all the I tell my students this often. Someone sitting in class with you right now, know them.
Yes. Yes.
Ask who they are, what they have some interest in, because you don't know what will happen. Because I got my job in DC because of the person I sat next to in public speaking.
So true.
And we were friends 4 years into graduation, and then, you made a call and a job interview, and it's been working a week. So and it wasn't because I had known a bunch of people in the political space. I didn't know the congressman that I went to work for. I knew someone on staff. So I think that's the key. Yeah. And I think my advice has always been, I use this, make your friends before you need them. So if you have friends, way before you ever need to ask about a job or introduce me to so-and-so, they're my friends. Do it.
Yeah, so true.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Well, thank y'all.
Appreciate it.
So you're like getting with broadband internet terrorism. That's
well, so eventually,
and it's a little frustrating.
Well, do you have 4G? Do you have 4G at your house? Have you checked to see if you can get 4G home? Verizon 4G home? You should check. And then eventually